So Henry Deacon described going in and having these meetings with these various types of humanoids that were working on the base. One of the things he said was that some of these humanoids required different gravitational pulls than we would. And so they had devised a way on these bases to have the floor generate its own gravitational field corresponding to the needs of the being. So certain areas of the base were delegated for certain beings, and you might walk into those areas and suddenly feel a lot heavier, and it's like hard to walk, and it's hard to move your arms, and you want to slouch. Or in other areas you might walk in and you feel really light and bouncy, and there's like a spring in your step. And this was the artificial gravity that was generated. Now, he had not seen reptilian beings like the Draco, this idea of a humanoid-looking dragon or snake type of being with a face that's kind of a reptile face but arms and legs like ours. However, there was a very interesting thing that he did say, and that was that these people that would have meetings had a certain type of being that would come in with very elaborate battle armor. And they did essentially have more or less a reptilian type of appearance to their skin, but they always wore masks. You couldn't actually see their faces. And he also described that everybody had to act deferentially to these beings. You would have to hold your head down like this. You couldn't even look up. You were not allowed to look at the mask. And everybody was afraid of these beings. All the other ETs were afraid of these beings. They appeared to have some kind of controlling role on this Mars facility. They had a very nasty kind of evil feeling, and they had a nasty smell. And so this became something where, again, it was weird and interesting that he didn't actually say they were reptilians, but they fit the description, and maybe the masks were just so that people weren't traumatized by looking at them. I don't know. Now, he talked to me about so many interesting things, and one of them was, and I'm not going to say where, but there are certain places in America in which small towns have actually had human extraterrestrials move in and live there. And there are doctors that work in these small towns who will know how to operate on these people because their physiology is not the same. So for example, you might have a dentist, but you can't just drill into their teeth the way you would into ours. The enamel might be harder, the roots might be in a different location, the teeth might be wider, there might be fewer teeth in their mouth, and they'll typically wear a snap-on plate that makes it look more real. Some of these people had really pale skin, and they would need to put makeup on in order to go out in the open. And this was also the first time that I had heard that there was a pilot program where the farmers market in Los Angeles, California, actually has these people show up. Now, he told me that this particular type of being, you really do not want them to know that you spotted them. He said that they are muscular, they look more or less human, but they look like albinos. But another weird feature of this particular type of human is that if they stick out their tongue, it could actually go down and touch the bottom of their chin. So they have longer tongues than we do. But these beings, if they figure out that you know who they are, they will track you psychically. And they can actually project into our reality and grab people. So it's not a good idea. It's not something you ever want to do to tip off that these people know who you are. Now, years later, we had the former Canadian Defense Minister, Paul Hellyer, come forward and basically say exactly the same thing. That there were certain cases where these whitish-looking people were being brought out into public places as part of this acclimation program. So Henry Deacon had also told me that there had been many other civilizations on Earth before the ones that we were familiar with, that there were plenty of ruins on Earth, that there were ruined extraterrestrial craft and cities underneath the surface. There was lots of stuff underground. And, of course, he's talking about working on Mars and that we had spaceships that could travel through our solar system. He hadn't really traveled outside the solar system per se. So then the story got even more interesting when I was having a dinner with people from Project Camelot at one of the Project Camelot conferences. And while I was there, I met a man who we're calling Jacob. And Jacob had worked for this same program that Henry Deacon had worked for. And at one point, I actually had Jacob and Henry Deacon in my house at the same time. And I wish I could have overheard what they were saying because it was all private. Jacob was positioned on a much, much higher level in the inside world than Henry Deacon had been, or for that matter, that Corey Goode has been. Corey Goode, by comparison to Jacob, was really more like a grunt or a shift worker, whereas Jacob was in a senior, top-level management position for this secret space program. Now, this is going to get really contentious really quickly. Everything I've been telling you up until now is going to get even more outrageous, but you have to bear with me. Jacob said that the main family that was running the secret space program on Earth was the Rothschild family, and he was directly working for them. He didn't like what they were doing. He didn't like their plans about mass genocide. And so he broke the rules quite a bit and told me a lot of things that they did not want him to say. After I met him at this dinner and I didn't really believe what he had to say, I kind of laughed at him when he was telling me some things. I gave him a chance again to come to my house, and he brought his laptop with him. So right off the bat, some really strange stuff starts to happen. First of all, he talked about a separate internet that they have. And this internet has small bursts of signal that piggyback on the signal of the rest of the internet. So like, let's say, if you just want to look at it on a line, like most of the internet signal is here, and then there's these little bitty packets in between that are shorter, but they're a lot denser. And none of our conventional routers or equipment would ever detect what those packets of information carry on them. But there is a whole separate system, a separate internet that runs on the backbone of the internet that you can log into that has all this weird classified stuff in it. And it's basically a database, it's a repository of all this highly classified information. So we're literally talking about a guy who worked for the Rothschilds. He described at one point having a meal where they had this stack of plates, and the widest plate's on the bottom, and it gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and you just eat your way down through the plates. And he said that it was the best food you've ever tasted in your whole life. He also described that when these people are actually in their secret meetings, there are certain occult clothing and jewelry that they wear that you would never normally see. And so he thought of them as gays, and because of his regional dialect, he called them puffs. And so they would have all these rings on their fingers. And the rings might have a giant ruby, or a giant sapphire, a giant emerald, or just be all gold. And so they would sit at the table like this, and they would be negotiating massive deals. We're talking in sometimes billions of dollars. And an entire transaction that could be worth $5 billion could literally be done by this guy moving his pinky finger with the ring on it. And then there's somebody there that writes it all down. They don't even talk. Like, somebody will be describing the deal, but everybody's got their hands out like this, and one guy will move his finger, and that means he's buying the deal. And this way, they're just moving through all this stuff very quickly. Now, Jacob described to me that his first experience in a military base that was deep underground, he was in the elevator and he could jump up. And when he jumped up, he actually started hovering, because the elevator is moving down so fast that it nullifies gravity. And he said that was a very strange experience. Now, in order to demonstrate his credibility, he pops open his laptop and he starts showing me some really strange stuff. One of the things he showed me was an enormous file, literally enormous, of bank accounts that were held by people like the Rothschilds. And I'm actually able to see names, and you'd have a first name in Rothschild, and then I'm seeing the account number or the account name, and then I'm seeing the passwords. Now, I'm sure they've changed it since then because I've leaked this before, but one of the things that I found the most astonishing was that, first of all, these accounts had billions of dollars in them. I mean, they were massive, massive amounts of money. And I'm telling you, he's hitting tab and he's just tabbing through page after page after page, and I can see and read really fast, but it's just Rothschild, all these other things, and various other names of so-called Illuminati people as well. Probably the most surprising thing to me, other than the dollar values of the accounts, because they were enormous, was that almost all of these accounts had the same password. And the password was the word equity in lowercase letters followed by a number that was between 1 and 3 digits. So you might have equity 594, equity 13, equity 707. And I'm thinking, well, this is not secure at all. But the whole system in which these transactions are processed is on this dark internet, this other internet that is not what we call the dark web, but it's actually a secondary internet that runs on a completely different packet system, but his smartphone was on it, and his laptop could get into it, and you could access it from a conventional modem.
In 2018, President Trump announced the development of Space Force, the sixth branch of the U.S. military.
To establish a Space Force.
The president and the American public were completely unaware that it already existed.
We put together programs that went all the way out into the galaxy.